Hello again, everybody. It's me, Chris Real, Baltimore City Guide and owner of Rent-A-Tour with another Baltimore story. And today, I want to talk about the Washington Monument. Now, I know what you're thinking. Chris, you fool! The Washington Monument isn't in Baltimore. The Washington Monument's in Washington, D.C. Well, first of all, don't call me a fool. And second of all, yes, you're right. There is a Washington Monument in Washington, D.C., but there's also one in Baltimore. And while D.C.'s monument may be a bit more famous, we had ours first. That's right here in Baltimore is the very first Washington Monument in the United States. Now, before my friends in Boonesboro get upset with me, yes, there is also a Washington Monument in Boonesboro that claims to be the first Washington Monument, and yes, that monument was the first to be completed, but construction on Baltimore's monument began first. So there's the difference, okay? Now, the same architect, a man by the name of Robert Mills, was responsible for designing both the monument in D.C. and the one here in Baltimore. Of course, in D.C., he built that very famous, that very well-known obelisk. And here in Baltimore, he built what's called a Doric column. And up on top of that column is a 14-foot statue of George Washington himself. And he's depicted here resigning his commission at Annapolis, which was an extremely significant moment, not only in American history, but also in world history, because at that time, shortly after the American Revolution, most governments of the world were still controlled by monarchies and military dictatorships. And in fact, many of Washington's own men wanted to make him a king. But Washington had enough wisdom and humility to understand that we did not endure this bloody revolution so that we could reestablish the monarchy here in this brand new nation. So he went before Congress, which at that time was convening in Annapolis, Maryland, and he surrendered his army. He resigned his military commission. He gave up an extraordinary amount of power. It was an extremely magnanimous and selfless act. And Washington, of course, would then go on to become the first president of the United States. Now, the citizens of Baltimore and Maryland were very enthusiastic about the idea of building a monument to honor George Washington. There was even a lottery in town to raise money. Only problem was no one was quite sure where to put it. We knew it was going to be a very tall monument, and there was a concern that a monument of that size might one day tip over. And if that ever happened, of course, we didn't want it to crush anybody's home. So instead of building the Washington Monument near the waterfront where most people were living in those days, the decision was made to build the Washington Monument way out in the middle of nowhere, over a mile away from the water's edge. All of that land out there at that time was nothing but rolling hills and trees, and it belonged to a man named John Eager Howard. And if that name sounds familiar to you, well, another Maryland county is named in his honor, Howard County. Well, in addition to owning all of that land north of the harbor, John Eager Howard also happened to be a veteran of the American Revolution, and he was a friend of George Washington's. So he was more than happy to donate a portion of his vast estate, which he called Belvedere, for the construction of the Washington Monument. And that construction began in 1815. Once the monument was completed, the neighborhood began to develop around it. And it developed into and remains today the cultural heart of Baltimore City. It's where you'll find some of our city's most beautiful architecture, as well as some of our most important cultural institutions, like the Walters Art Museum and the Peabody Conservatory of Music. Today, the neighborhood around the Washington Monument is known as Mount Vernon, in honor of George Washington's Northern Virginia estate. In 2015, the monument underwent an extensive restoration in honor of its 200th birthday. And today, you can go inside the base of the Washington Monument, tour the museum that's located there, and then, if you're feeling up for it, you can climb all 227 spiral steps through the center of that Doric column all the way up to the top of the Washington Monument. And once you catch your breath, you'll get a beautiful view of Baltimore. George Washington was a hero of the American Revolution, the very first president of the United States, truly the father of our country. And the very first monument in his honor is right here in Baltimore. And if you'd like to include a visit to the Washington Monument and Mount Vernon on your next visit to Baltimore, well, visit our website, www.rentatour.com. You can learn more about this and other experiences in and around the capital region. And don't forget to follow me on Twitter and Instagram at RealDeal125, at RealDeal125. Please like, please share this video. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel. And if you've got an idea for an upcoming video, just let me know. You can tweet at me, you can leave a comment here, and I'll be happy to do my best to get that on for you as quickly as I can. I'll be back with another Baltimore story real soon, but until then, thanks so much for watching. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you around.